Captain Lee Gina stepped off the transport ship and felt her boots touch alien ground for the first time. The crystalline surface beneath her feet sparkled like diamonds, but cold air hit her face immediately. This wasn't Earth. This was the homeworld of the Veltar Empire, and she was here to save humanity. The Veltar had controlled this part of space for over 1,000 years. Their ships were faster than anything humans had ever built. Their weapons could slice through asteroid belts like butter. But now something was coming that scared even them. Machine swarms from the dark edges of space were eating entire planets, turning everything into more machines. Earth needed allies, and the Veltar were their only hope. Gina walked through halls made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Her team of 5 humans followed behind her, their boots clicking on the smooth floor. Everything here was beautiful but felt cold and unwelcoming. The walls seemed to watch them as they passed. Finally, they reached the throne room. It was massive, bigger than any building on Earth. Crystal pillars stretched up so high that Gina couldn't see the ceiling, and there, sitting on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single giant diamond, was Queen Aria. The alien queen was stunning in a way that made Gina's breath catch. Her skin looked like it was made of pale blue crystal, and it actually was. Light seemed to flow through her body like water. Her hair was long and white, floating around her head as if she was underwater. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean, and they looked right through Gina like she was nothing special. "Humans," Queen Aria said, and her voice sounded like wind, chimes in a gentle breeze. "You have traveled far to reach us. Why?" Gina stepped forward and bowed slightly, the way her diplomatic training had taught her. "Your Majesty, I'm Captain Lee Gina from Earth. We come seeking alliance against the machine swarms threatening both our peoples." The Queen's expression didn't change. "We know of these harvesters. They are a concern, but not our primary one. You humans are young and weak. What could you possibly offer us?" This was the moment Gina had prepared for. She gestured to her team, and they brought forward carefully packed containers. "We bring gifts from Earth. Our art, our music, our stories, and our technology that might surprise you." As they opened the first container, Queen Aria leaned forward slightly. Inside was a simple wooden sculpture of a bird in flight, carved by a human artist. The Queen's eyes widened just a little. "This is made from a living tree," Gina explained. "On Earth, we create beauty from the materials around us. We don't just take what we transform." They showed her recordings of human music, from classical symphonies to rock concerts. They demonstrated human medical techniques that could heal wounds in ways the Veltar had never seen. And they shared human stories of courage, love, and sacrifice. But as Gina reached toward the Queen to hand her a small gift, every Veltar in the room suddenly moved. Guards stepped forward with weapons that hummed with energy. The Queen raised her hand sharply. "Stop," Queen Aria commanded, her voice now hard as ice. "You are forbidden to touch me, human. You are forbidden to touch any of us. This is our most sacred law. Break it and you die." Gina froze, her hand still extended. The gift, a simple earth flower preserved in crystal, hung in the air between them. She could see something in the Queen's eyes that wasn't just coldness. There was something else there. Fear? Sadness? She couldn't tell. "I understand, Your Majesty," Gina said softly, pulling her hand back. "We respect your ways." But deep in her heart, she wondered why such beautiful beings would forbid the simple act of touch. What were they hiding? Over the next few days, everything seemed to go perfectly. The Veltar showed genuine curiosity about human ways, asking detailed questions about Earth's military strategies and cultural practices. Captain Lee Gina found herself spending hours in conference rooms made of glowing crystal, explaining how humans fought wars and built societies. The Veltar military commanders were particularly interested in human tactics. "Your species fights differently than ours," said General Keth, his crystalline face reflecting the room's soft light. "We rely on superior technology and overwhelming force, but you humans, you adapt, you improvise. You find ways to win even when you should lose." Gina smiled at that. "We call it being scrappy. When you don't have the best weapons or the strongest ships, you learn to be creative. The alien generals exchanged glances that Gina couldn't quite read. Were they impressed or concerned? She chose to believe it was admiration, but the real breakthrough came when Queen Arya requested a private meeting. Late one evening, Gina was escorted to the Queen's personal chambers, a smaller room with walls that shifted between different shades of blue and purple. It felt more intimate than the cold throne room. "Sit," Queen Arya said, gesturing to a chair that seemed to grow from the floor itself. "We need to discuss the real threat." For the first time since arriving, Gina heard something different in the Queen's voice. The formal coldness was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded almost human. Worry. "Tell me about the harvesters," the Queen continued. "Your species has encountered them before, yes?" Gina nodded grimly. 3 of our outer colonies were completely consumed. We barely managed to evacuate the populations. These machines, they don't just destroy planets. They turn everything into more of themselves. The metal, the rock, even the organic matter. It all becomes part of their swarm. Queen Arya stood and walked to a window that looked out over her crystal city. In the distance, Gina could see Veltar citizens moving through streets that glowed with bioluminescent light. They looked peaceful, unaware of the danger approaching from the dark between stars. "They have consumed 14 star systems in this sector alone," the Queen said quietly. "Our long-range scouts report that their main fleet is massive beyond comprehension. Millions of ships all thinking as one mind. That's why we need to work together," Gina said, standing up as well. "Humans might not have your advanced technology, but we have something else. We think differently. Every human mind is unique. We don't have a hive mind like the harvesters do." For a moment, Queen Arya turned to look at her, and Gina saw something unexpected in those deep blue eyes. The Queen almost smiled. "You humans are fascinating creatures," she said. "Your ambassador Kim Day told me yesterday that humans have a saying, 'Necessity is the mother of invention.' I think I understand what that means now." Over the following days, they worked on drafting a formal treaty. The Veltar would provide their advanced ships and energy weapons. Humans would contribute their tactical knowledge and what Queen Arya called their chaotic creativity. It seemed like a perfect partnership. Gina began to notice small changes in the Queen's behavior. Sometimes, when they were discussing battle plans, Arya would lean forward with genuine interest. Once, when Gina told a joke about human military life, she actually saw the Queen's lips twitch, with what might have been amusement. "Your Majesty," Gina said one evening as they finished reviewing fleet formations, "may I ask you something personal?" "Queen." Arya raised an elegant eyebrow. "You may ask, I may not answer. Do you have family, people you're fighting to protect?" The Queen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Gina had ever heard it. "I have a younger brother, Prince Kale. He commands our fastest ships. And yes, Captain Gina, I fight for him, just as you fight for your Earth." It was the first time the Queen had used her name instead of just calling her human. Gina felt a warm feeling in her chest. Maybe, despite their differences, they could really become allies, maybe even friends. She had no idea how wrong she was. The day of the treaty signing felt like the dawn of a new era. Captain Lee Gina stood in the grand ceremonial hall, wearing her best diplomatic uniform. Sunlight streamed through crystal walls, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. Her team of 5 humans stood proudly beside her, each holding a copy of the alliance document they had worked so hard to create. Queen Arya entered wearing robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. She moved with grace that made everything feel magical and hopeful. Representatives from both species filled the hall, and Gina could see genuine smiles on many Veltar faces. After days of negotiations, they had done it. Humanity would have its first alien allies. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history," Queen Arya announced, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "2 species, united against the darkness that threatens us all." Gina felt her heart swell with pride. Behind her, she could hear her communications officer Park Min quietly recording everything for Earth. This moment would be remembered forever. The Queen picked up a crystal pen that glowed with soft blue light. She signed her name in flowing alien script across the treaty document. Then she handed the pen to Gina with what looked like a genuine smile. "For the future of both our peoples," Gina said, taking the pen carefully to avoid any forbidden contact. But as she leaned forward to sign, something felt wrong. The hall had become too quiet. She looked up and saw Queen Arya's expression had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and terrible. "Now," the Queen said quietly. The word hit Gina like a physical blow. Suddenly, Veltar warriors emerged from hidden alcoves throughout the hall. Their weapons were already charging, making a high-pitched whining sound that made Gina's teeth ache. "What is this?" Gina shouted, dropping the pen and reaching for her sidearm, but it was too late. Energy beams filled the air with deadly light. Her communications officer, Park Min, was the first to fall, a look of complete shock on his face as the blast hit his chest. Engineer Kobin tried to run but didn't make it 3 steps before he collapsed. "No!" Gina screamed, watching her team die around her. These were good people, her friends. Lieutenant Yu Ri had a daughter back on Earth. Pilot Nam Su collected old books and always made everyone laugh during long flights. Medical officer Dr. Han Sol had saved dozens of lives during the colony evacuations. Now they were all dead. Gina fired her weapon wildly, but human technology seemed like a toy compared to Veltar energy weapons. She hit one warrior in the shoulder, but his crystal armor absorbed the impact easily. A beam grazed her left arm, spinning her around and sending pain shooting through her body. She fell to her knees, blood soaking through her uniform. Another shot burned across her ribs, and she could smell her own flesh burning. "Kill the last one," came a voice from somewhere behind her. Gina closed her eyes and thought of Earth. At least she had tried. At least humanity would know that the Veltar couldn't be trusted. Maybe that knowledge would help somehow, but the killing shot never came. "Stop!" Queen Arya's voice rang out with absolute authority. "This one is mine." Gina opened her eyes to see the Queen standing over her, looking down with an expression that seemed almost pained. "Your Majesty," asked General Keth, his weapon still pointed at Gina's head. "I claim this human as my personal prisoner," Queen Arya announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She will serve as my trophy from this victory." The general lowered his weapon reluctantly. "As you command, my queen." Gina stared up at the alien who had just saved her life, blood running down her arm and dripping onto the crystal floor. "Why?" she whispered. Queen Arya's blue eyes met hers for just a moment, and Gina saw something there that confused her. Regret? Guilt? Pain? "Because," the Queen said so quietly that only Gina could hear, "someone must live to remember what really happened here." As Veltar guards dragged her away, Gina's mind reeled with questions. Why had they betrayed the alliance? What did Queen Arya mean about remembering? And most importantly, how many human colonies would die because of the information the Veltar now possessed? The crystal halls that had seemed so beautiful before now felt like a tomb. The prison cell was nothing like Gina expected. Instead of metal bars, she found herself trapped behind walls of dark crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her wounds had been roughly bandaged, but pain still shot through her arm and side with every movement. She sat on the cold floor trying to make sense of what had happened. Her team was dead. The alliance was a lie, and somehow she was still alive. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Gina looked up, expecting to see guards coming to interrogate her, or maybe finish what they had started in the ceremonial hall. Instead, she saw something that made her jaw drop. Queen Arya was being dragged down the hallway by 4 Veltar warriors. The elegant alien queen's starlight robes were torn and dirty. Her hands were bound with some kind of energy restraints that glowed red against her crystal skin. Most shocking of all, there was a mark burned into her forehead, a symbol that looked like a broken crown. "Traitor!" one of the guards spat as they threw the queen into the cell across from Gina's. "You shame our entire species." The cell door sealed shut with a sound like breaking glass. The guards left without another word, their footsteps fading into silence. For a long time, neither Gina nor Queen Arya spoke. They just sat in their separate cells, staring at each other through the dark crystal barriers. Finally, Gina couldn't take the silence anymore. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you save me?" Queen Arya looked up slowly. Without her royal robes and crown, she looked smaller somehow, more fragile. "Because I couldn't watch another innocent person die for our lies." "Our lies?" Gina leaned forward despite the pain in her ribs. "What lies?" The Queen was quiet for so long that Gina thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "We made a deal with the Harvesters 3 months ago," she said. "We gave them the locations of your outer colonies in exchange for a promise. They said they would spare our worlds if we helped them destroy yours." Gina felt sick. The colonies that had been consumed, the millions of people who had died. "You sold us out?" "Yes," Queen Arya's voice cracked. "And it was all for nothing. The Harvesters lied to us just as we lied to you." "What do you mean?" Queen Arya stood up slowly, and Gina could see something was wrong with her movements. The Queen's left arm seemed stiff, and when she turned toward the light, Gina gasped. Parts of the Queen's crystal skin looked cloudy and cracked, like old glass about to shatter. "My people are dying," Queen Arya said simply. "We have been dying for centuries." She explained how an ancient plague had infected their species long ago. It turned their beautiful crystal bodies brittle and weak. The disease spread slowly, taking decades to kill, but it was always fatal in the end. "The touching taboo," Gina said, understanding flooding through her. "It's not about culture at all." "Contact with other species makes the plague spread faster," Queen Arya confirmed. "That's why we forbid it. That's why we've isolated ourselves. For so long." Gina watched as the Queen sat down heavily, her movements careful and pained. "But you're already sick, aren't you?" Queen Arya nodded. "I have maybe a year left. My brother Kale is in the early stages. Most of our military leaders are infected. We're a dying species, Captain Gina. When the Harvesters promised us a cure in exchange for betraying humanity, we were desperate enough to believe them. And now? Now we know the truth. There is no cure. The Harvesters plan to harvest our crystal bodies once the plague finishes killing us. They never intended to honor their agreement." Gina stared at the alien Queen through the dark crystal barrier. Everything made sense now. The coldness, the desperation, the willingness to betray potential allies. They had been dying all along, so what happens now? Gina asked. Queen Arya looked at her with those deep blue eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sadness. "Now we wait to die together. You, because you're human. Me, because I chose to save. You instead of watching you be murdered." But Gina's mind was already working. She was a military officer, trained to think tactically even in the worst situations, and she was human, which meant she never gave up. "Maybe there's another way," she said quietly. Queen Arya looked at her with something that might have been hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean maybe it's not over yet, for either of us." The Queen leaned forward, pressing her face against the crystal barrier between them. For the first time since this nightmare began, Gina saw something other than despair in those alien eyes. 3 days passed in the dark crystal prison, and Gina watched Queen Arya get worse by the hour. The cracks in the alien's skin spread like spider webs across her arms and neck. Sometimes she would try to stand and stumble, her legs too weak to support her weight. The beautiful crystal glow that had once made her seem magical was fading to a dull gray. "You need help," Gina said on the morning of the 4th day, pressing her face against the barrier between their cells. Queen Arya was lying on her side, breathing heavily. "There is no help. This is how my people die, slowly, painfully, alone." But Gina couldn't just sit there and watch. She had been a medic before becoming a captain, trained to save lives even when the situation seemed hopeless. Her own wounds were healing well thanks to her human immune system, while the Queen was clearly dying. "The barrier," Gina said suddenly. "How does it work?" "Energy field," the Queen whispered. "Keeps us separated. Prevents contamination." Gina studied the dark crystal walls more carefully. She had noticed that the barrier flickered sometimes, especially when the prison's power systems cycled for maintenance. If she timed it right, that evening when the lights dimmed for the night cycle, Gina watched the barrier carefully. There, a split-second flicker as the system reset. She pressed her hand against the crystal at exactly the right moment, and felt her fingers pass through. The barrier was down for less than a second, but it was enough. Gina squeezed through the gap just as the field reactivated behind her. "No!" Queen Aria tried to sit up in alarm. "You cannot touch me. The plague will spread to you." But Gina was already kneeling beside her. "I'm human. We're different. Maybe your plague can't affect us." Before the Queen could protest further, Gina placed her hands on the worst of the crystal. Cracks along Aria's arm. The Queen's skin felt strange, warm but hard like touching heated glass. "Please," Queen Aria whispered. "You don't understand what you're risking." "I understand perfectly," Gina said firmly. "I'm risking my life to save yours. That's what humans do." For the next hour, Gina used every medical technique she knew. She cleaned the Queen's wounds with torn pieces of her own clothing, applied pressure to stop the crystal fragments from flaking away, and even shared her water ration to keep the alien hydrated. At first, nothing seemed to change. Queen Aria grew weaker, her breathing more labored. Gina began to think she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she would die too, and it would all be for nothing. But then, something incredible happened. The cracks in Queen Aria's skin stopped spreading. The grey colour began to fade back toward the original crystal blue. Her breathing became easier. "What?" The Queen stared at her own arm in amazement. "How is this possible?" Gina felt exhausted but excited. "I think my immune system is fighting your plague." Humans adapt to diseases differently than other species. Over the next 2 days, the improvement continued. Queen Aria grew stronger, while Gina felt perfectly fine. No symptoms, no sickness, nothing. Her body had encountered the alien plague and simply handled it. "This changes everything," Queen Aria said, as she sat up without difficulty for the first time in weeks. "If humans are immune to our plague, we might be able to help your whole species," Gina finished. "But first I need to understand something. Where did this plague come from originally?" Queen Aria's expression darkened. "Our historians say it appeared suddenly, about 800 years ago. It came from the deep space regions brought by metal ships." The pieces clicked together in Gina's mind like a puzzle. The harvesters, they created this plague, didn't they? It would seem so. A bioweapon designed to weaken us over centuries, making us desperate enough to betray our potential allies when they returned. Gina stood up and paced the small cell, her mind racing. "They've been planning this for 800 years, weakening your species, isolating you, making you afraid to work with others. When they came back, you were so desperate you'd do anything for a cure. Even betray innocent humans," Queen Aria said quietly. "But they didn't count on human adaptability," Gina continued. "Our immune systems evolved to handle thousands of different diseases on Earth. We're like a universal solvent for biological weapons." Queen Aria looked at her with growing hope. "You think you can cure us, really cure us?" "I think humanity might be the key to saving your species," Gina said. "But we need to get out of here first. We need to warn both our peoples about what's really happening." The Queen stood up, moving with strength she hadn't shown in days. "Then we escaped together, human and Veltar fighting side by side. For the first time since the betrayal," Gina smiled. "Now you're thinking like a human." Retricef working in their prison cell felt impossible, but Gina and Queen Aria had no choice. Using makeshift tools carved from crystal fragments and strips of fabric, they began experimenting with the one resource they had plenty of, Gina's blood. "This is insane," Queen Aria muttered as she watched Gina carefully prick her finger with a sharp crystal shard. "We have no proper equipment, no laboratory, no time," Gina finished, letting drops of her blood fall into a small depression they had carved in the cell floor. Sometimes the best medicine happens in the worst conditions. They mixed Gina's blood with flakes of the Queen's damaged crystal skin, watching carefully for any reaction. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, the grey diseased crystal began to clear, returning to its natural blue color. "It's working," Queen Aria breathed. "Your blood is actually healing the plague damage." Over the next several days, they refined their technique. Gina learned that her blood plasma worked best when mixed with a specific mineral found in Veltar crystal formations. Queen Arya used her knowledge of her people's biology to guide the process. The real breakthrough came when Queen Arya volunteered to test a larger dose. "If this kills me, at least we'll know it doesn't work," she said with grim humor. But it didn't kill her. Instead, the treatment worked better than they had dared hope. The remaining cracks in her skin healed completely. Her strength returned. Most importantly, blood tests using primitive methods confirmed that the plague was completely gone from her system. "We did it," Gina said, hardly believing it herself. "We actually found a cure." Their celebration was interrupted by the sound of running feet in the corridor outside. Guards rushed past their cell, shouting urgent messages in the Veltar language. "What are they saying?" Gina asked. Queen Arya listened carefully, her face growing pale. "The Harvester fleet has arrived. They're 3 days out from our home system." Everything changed in that moment. The guards came for Queen Arya an hour later, dragging her from the cell for an emergency council meeting. They left Gina behind, but she could hear raised voices echoing through the crystal corridors. When Queen Arya returned hours later, she looked exhausted and frustrated. "They won't listen," she said, slumping against the cell wall. "I told the High Council everything. About the cure, about your blood, about how we could save our people. They called me a fool." "What exactly did they say?" "That human medicine is primitive and dangerous. That trusting aliens got us into this mess in the first place. General Keth said we should die with honor rather than rely on contaminated human fluids." Queen Arya's voice was bitter. 800 years of isolation have made my people proud and stupid." Gina felt anger building in her chest. "So they'd rather let everyone die than admit they need help." "It's worse than that. They've decided to attack the Harvester fleet. With everything we have. A final glorious battle that will destroy both sides." Queen Arya looked up at Gina with desperate eyes. "My brother Kale is leading the attack. He'll die along with the rest of our military. There has to be something we can do." Queen Arya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was determined. "There is, but it means betraying my people's orders again." "What do you mean?" "The Royal Medical Facility has equipment we need to mass-produce the cure. If we could get there, we could create enough treatment for thousands of our people. But it would mean breaking you out of prison, defying the High Council's direct orders, and stealing royal property." Gina couldn't help but smile. "You're starting to think like a human. Is that good or bad? In this situation, it's the only way to save lives." Queen Arya stood up, her movements strong and confident for the first time since Gina had known her. The cure had given her more than physical health. It had given her hope. "Then we do this together," the Queen said. "One human and one reformed Veltar against the galaxy. What about your people's pride?" Queen Arya's expression hardened with determination. "Pride won't bring back the dead. If saving my species makes me a traitor twice over, so be it." Outside their cell, alarms began blaring. The Harvester fleet was getting closer, and time was running out. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Gina felt like they actually had a chance. Sometimes saving people meant breaking rules. Sometimes being a hero meant being called a villain. She was ready for both. The escape from prison happened faster than Gina expected. Queen Arya knew secret passages through the royal palace that even the guards didn't know about. They moved through hidden corridors carved into the crystal walls, carrying vials of the precious cure they had created. "The medical facility is just ahead," Queen Arya whispered as they crept through a maintenance tunnel. "But getting inside won't be easy." She was right. The Royal Medical Center was heavily guarded, with at least 20 Veltar soldiers standing watch. But Gina had an idea that was completely crazy, and therefore completely human. "What if we don't sneak in?" she suggested. "What if we walk right through the front door?" Queen Arya stared at her. "That's suicide." "Maybe. Or maybe it's exactly what they won't expect." Before the Queen could stop her, Gina walked out of the tunnel and directly toward the main entrance. The guards raised their weapons immediately, energy beams charging with that familiar whining sound. "Stop!" shouted the guard captain. "You're the human prisoner." "Yes, I am," Gina called back calmly, "and I'm here to save your lives." Behind her, Queen Arya emerged from the tunnel. The guards looked confused. Their queen was supposed to be in prison too, but here she was, walking freely beside the enemy human. "Your Majesty," the guard captain said uncertainly, "we have orders to shoot the human on sight." "And I have orders for you to stand down," Queen Arya replied with royal authority. "This human carries the cure for our plague." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. In the distance, alarms were still blaring. The Harvester fleet was getting closer every hour. "Prove it," the guard captain demanded. Queen Arya looked at Gina, then made a decision that would change everything. She stepped forward and, in full view of all the guards, wrapped her arms around Gina in a tight embrace. The reaction was immediate. Every guard stepped back in shock. Some dropped their weapons. Others made religious gestures to ward off evil. Physical contact between species had been forbidden for over 800 years. "Your Majesty," the guard captain gasped, "the contamination, you'll die!" But Queen Arya held Gina tight for several long seconds before stepping back. Her crystal skin glowed with perfect health. No cracks appeared. No grey discoloration spread across her body. "I embraced this human 3 days ago," Queen Arya announced loudly. "And look at me. I am not sick. I am not dying. The human blood has cured me completely." Word spread through the palace like wildfire. Within an hour, crowds of Veltar gathered outside the medical facility. Some came in anger, shouting about ancient traditions being broken, but many more came in hope, seeing their queen healthy and strong for the first time in years. The High Council was forced to hold an emergency session. General Keth arrived with Prince Kael, the Queen's brother, who looked pale and weak with advancing plague symptoms. "This is madness," General Keth declared. "You ask us to trust primitive human medicine over millennia of wisdom. I ask you to trust what you can see with your own eyes," Queen Arya replied. She gestured to Gina, who stood beside her without restraints. "This human has done what our greatest scientists could not. She has found a way to heal our people." Prince Kael stepped forward, his movements careful and pained. "Sister, are you certain this works?" Instead of answering with words, Queen Arya took a vial of the cure and handed it to her brother. "Drink this and judge for yourself." The throne. Room fell silent as Prince Kael raised the vial to his lips. Everyone watched as he swallowed the human blood treatment. For several tense minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then slowly the grey patches on his arms began to clear. The cracks in his crystal skin started to heal. His breathing became easier. "By the ancient stars," he whispered, "I can feel the sickness leaving my body." That broke the dam of resistance. Veltar nobles who had been skeptical suddenly wanted the cure for themselves and their families. The military commanders realized that healthy soldiers would fight better than dying ones. But the real breakthrough came when Gina suggested combining their technologies. "Your energy weapons are incredible," she told the assembled military leaders. "But your battle tactics are too rigid. You fight like you have all the time in the world." "And how do humans fight?" asked Admiral Peth, one of the few high-ranking officers still healthy enough to command a ship. "Fast and dirty," Gina grinned. "We adapt constantly. We use whatever works, and we never ever give up." Working together, they created battle plans that combined Veltar precision with human unpredictability. Veltar ships would provide the heavy firepower, while human-trained pilots would provide tactical flexibility. Most importantly, healthy Veltar crews could think more clearly and react faster than sick ones. The cure wasn't just saving lives, it was creating a fighting force that could actually challenge the Harvesters. "The enemy fleet arrives in 18 hours, Queen Arya announced to the combined human-Veltar command center they had established. "Are we ready?" Gina looked around the room at faces that showed determination instead of despair. Veltar and humans working side by side, sharing knowledge and resources. "We're ready," she said confidently. "Let's show these machines what happens when you mess with living beings who refuse to quit." The final battle was about to begin. The combined fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships, small and fast, flew alongside massive Veltar crystal vessels that gleamed like floating cities. Captain Park Minho sat in the cockpit of his fighter, watching the alien ships around him with amazement. "All human pilots, this is Park Minho, he spoke into his radio. Remember what Captain Gina taught us. These crystal ships are our allies now. Follow their lead on the big targets, but stay flexible. Behind him, 50 other human fighters responded with confirmation. They were all volunteers who had arrived on the last transport from Earth, coming to help rescue their captured diplomat. None of them had expected to find themselves fighting alongside the same aliens who had betrayed them. Prince Kale's voice came through the communication system, translated by new technology that both species had quickly developed. Human fighters, this is Prince Kale commanding the Crystal Fleet. We are honored to fight beside you. The prince's flagship was a sight to behold, a crystalline ship nearly a mile long that pulsed with internal light. Around it, dozens of smaller Veltar vessels formed a defensive formation that looked like a flower made of living diamonds. Harvester fleet detected at the system's edge, reported Lieutenant Yu Jin from her scouting position. Count is... Oh no, there are thousands of them. Through his fighter's viewport, Park Minho could see them approaching. The Harvester fleet looked like a swarm of metal insects, each ship black and angular with no curves or beauty. They moved with perfect coordination like parts of a single massive machine. Remember the plan, Queen Aria's voice came through the radio from the command center on the planet below. Captain Gina's tactical analysis showed that the Harvesters expect predictable behavior. We give them anything but predictable. The battle began when the Harvesters were still an hour away from the planet. Instead of waiting for them to attack, the combined fleet struck first. This alone seemed to confuse the enemy. Their formation wavered slightly as they tried to process this unexpected aggression. Park Minho led his squadron in a wild attack pattern that no military academy would ever approve. His fighters swooped and dove around the crystal ships like birds protecting their nests. When Harvester beams tried to target the small human craft, they often hit Veltar vessels instead. Vessels whose crystal hulls reflected the energy harmlessly back at the attackers. "It's working," shouted pilot Ko Yun as she watched 3 Harvester ships destroy each other with their own reflected weapons fire. "They can't handle our chaotic flying." Prince Kale's crystal ships provided the heavy firepower. Their main guns could punch through multiple Harvester vessels with a single shot, but more importantly, the healthy Veltar crews could think creatively now that they weren't slowly dying from plague. "Human squadron, dive low while we fire over you," Prince Kale commanded. Park Minho grinned and pushed his fighter into a steep dive that would have been impossible to coordinate with sick alien crews. The massive crystal cannons fired over his head, vaporizing a cluster of Harvester ships that had been trying to flank them. The key moment came when the Harvester command ship, a massive black pyramid the size of a small moon, began coordinating. A counterattack. The enemy had finally figured out the new tactics and was adapting. "They're learning," warned Dr. Nam Hee from her analysis position. "The Harvesters are starting to counter our unpredictable movements." "Then we get more unpredictable," Park Minho replied. He switched to a private channel with Prince Kyle. "Your Highness, how crazy are you willing to get? What do you have in mind, human pilot?" "Ram them. Your crystal ships are tough enough to survive it, and they'll never expect a suicide charge that isn't actually suicide." There was a pause. Then Prince Kale's laughter came through the radio. The first time Park Minho had ever heard a Veltar laugh. "I like how humans think," the prince said. "All crystal ships prepare for ramming speed." What happened next became legend. The massive Veltar vessels, their hulls reinforced with human-designed armor plating, charged directly into the Harvester formation. The enemy machines, programmed to expect rational behavior, couldn't process ships deliberately colliding with them. Crystal hulls smashed through metal ones. Veltar vessels emerged from the other side, damaged but intact, while Harvester ships broke apart like glass. The human fighters followed in their wake, targeting the confused survivors. "The command ship is retreating," reported Lieutenant Yu Jin. "The whole fleet is breaking formation." Park Minho couldn't believe what he was seeing. The unstoppable Harvester swarm was actually running away. Cooperation between 2 species had accomplished what neither could have done alone. "This is Prince Kale to all ships," came the triumphant voice. "Victory is ours." As the enemy fleet disappeared into deep space, Park Minho looked around at the mixed human and Veltar vessels floating together in space. Some were damaged, but they had all survived. "Not bad for a first date," he radioed to Prince Kale. The alien prince's translated laughter filled the communication channels of both fleets. 6 months after the battle, Captain Lee Gina stood in what used to be Queen Arya's throne room. The massive space had been completely transformed. Instead of a single crystal throne, there were now 2 circular tables, one sized for humans, one for Veltar, placed side by side in the center of the room. "The Interspecies Council will now come to order," Gina announced, though the formality felt strange after everything they had been through together. Around the table sat representatives from both species. Admiral Park Minho, now promoted after his heroics in the battle, sat next to Prince Kale, who had become the Veltar military commander. Dr. Nam He worked alongside Veltar scientists who were still amazed by human medical techniques. But the real change was visible in how everyone interacted. Veltar and humans shook hands freely, shared meals, and even hugged when saying goodbye. The ancient taboo against touch had become a symbol of cooperation. "First item of business," Queen Arya said, reading from a crystal tablet that displayed text in both languages. "The refugee resettlement program. The victory against the harvesters had come at a cost. While the main fleet had been defeated, smaller machine swarms continued to threaten outer colonies. Thousands of humans and Veltar had lost their homes and needed new places to live. The orbital station above Earth is ready to house 5,000 Veltar refugees," reported Engineer Kobin, who had somehow survived the initial betrayal with serious injuries, but made a full recovery. "And the crystal cities here can accommodate about 3,000 humans." Gina smiled at how naturally everyone discussed mixed communities now. Human children were already learning Veltar language in school, while young Veltar studied human history and culture. "What about the medical program?" asked Dr. Han Sol, the only other survivor from Gina's original diplomatic team. Queen Arya gestured to a report that made both species proud. "We've successfully treated over 50,000 Veltar with the human blood cure. The plague that haunted us for 8 centuries is finally ending. More importantly, Veltar and human doctors were working together to develop new treatments. Human adaptability combined with Veltar precision was creating medical breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone." "Any word from the Outer Rim Patrol?" Prince Kale asked. Captain Park Minho nodded grimly. "We've identified 3 more Harvester scout groups. Small ones, but they're still out there. Our joint squadrons are tracking them down one by one." The war wasn't completely over. Scattered machine remnants still posed threats throughout the galaxy, but the combined human-Veltar fleets were proving incredibly effective at hunting them down. After the official meeting ended, Gina and Queen Arya walked through the palace gardens together. The space had been redesigned to accommodate both species, crystal formations that Veltar loved, growing alongside earth flowers that humans had brought from home. "Look at them," Queen Arya said, pointing to a group of children playing near a fountain. Human kids and young Veltar were playing a game that seemed to involve a lot of running and laughing. The alien children moved with that strange grace their species was known for, while the human kids brought their usual chaotic energy to everything. "6 months ago, my people would have been horrified by this sight," the Queen continued. "Now I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." A human girl named Lee So Young ran up to them, followed closely by a young Veltar whose crystal skin sparkled in the sunlight. "Captain Gina, Queen Arya," So Young called out breathlessly, "can you settle an argument? Vel is trying to tell me that their ships are faster than ours, but I know human fighters are more maneuverable." The young Veltar, whose name translated roughly to Vel, made a sound that was probably their version of laughter. "Human ships are like flying rocks compared to our crystal vessels. How about we take you both up for a test flight tomorrow?" Gina suggested. "You can judge for yourselves." Both children cheered and ran back to their games, switching effortlessly between human and Veltar languages as they played. "They make it look so easy," Queen Arya observed. "Kids always do," Gina replied. "They don't carry around centuries of prejudice and fear like adults do." That evening, as the 2 leaders reviewed reports in the council chamber, Queen Aria asked a question that had been on her mind for months. Do you think we'll ever completely trust each other? Our species, I mean. Gina considered this seriously. I think trust isn't something you achieve once, and then it's done. It's something you build every day with every interaction, every shared meal, every time you choose cooperation over conflict. Queen Aria reached across the table and took Gina's hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months before. Then let's keep building, she said. Outside the palace windows, the lights of the mixed human Veltar city twinkled like stars. In space above them, joint patrol ships kept watch against any remaining threats. And in the gardens, maintenance. Crews from both species worked together to tend plants from two different worlds. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, cultural misunderstandings, and the occasional bout of prejudice from older generations. But they were building something new. Not a human empire or a Veltar kingdom, but a true partnership between species. You know what the best part is? Gina said as they watched a Veltar engineer teach a human child how crystal technology worked. What's that? We're not just surviving anymore. We're actually living, Queen Aria smiled, her crystal features glowing, with happiness instead of the cold formality Gina had first encountered. Yes, she agreed, we're finally living.